think that's the smoothest start we've ever had to the camera feature on not Hoosier Stereo. What is this? Inside Indiana Overtime. Sorry, I got like 4 hours of sleep last night because my sinuses are going mad on me. In what I think, anyway, if my math is not wrong and my adult brain will be my final ever Inside Indiana Overtime, at least as a full-time employee here. We're talking about history.
Yeah.
Indiana defeats Penn State 44-24. Obviously not a vintage Penn State team, but at the same time, how often do you see Indiana beat a Big Ten team, any Big Ten team, by 20? And it was really, I mean, you know, at a certain level, it was the way they did it. The defense was very good, 410 total yards allowed, but only 70 rushing yards. I think only 120 rushing yards to Penn State backs, which is, it's a little different because Penn State had a sack, had a
field goal.
It's a bad snap they lost 31 yards on. But still, 120 rushing yards allowed to the backs alone is still less than half of what Indiana was averaging in rushing yards allowed per game through 4 games this year. So a very good performance there. The offense took a little while to get going. I mean, you kind of figured maybe that would happen. Penn State's not that bad. Their real problems are in depth. You know, the scholarship reduction is just, it doesn't sound like a lot in an 85-man roster, but when you are short 10, 15, 20 players to the team across the field, it takes its toll over the course of a game, over the course of a season. And you can see that as Indiana scores, 31 points in the second half. And it was this idea that, you know, Indiana scores 23 points in the fourth quarter, reels off 3 unanswered touchdowns, I think, in the fourth quarter.
Like 5 minutes, basically.
And this idea that Indiana closed the game, which Indiana doesn't do very often. There were moments in the first 2.5 quarters especially where you felt like Indiana would have folded a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where maybe they kind of bowed their backs through a bad break or a tough call or something like that, or a mistake, and made a play, answered a score with a score. And really just in general, I mean, I think the way I asked Bobby Richardson the question after the game was, did it feel to you like in those crucial moments that add up to who's going to win or lose, and they're all over the field, who turns the ball over, who sustains a drive on 3rd and long, you know, who makes the most of a mistake by the opposition, who answers a timely score with another one. Did it feel like you made the most of those plays in this game? And he said, yeah, and that's kind of what it felt like. And it's very basic and it's very unscientific, or at least hard to prove with statistics. But it's something that Kevin Wilson has talked about for a long time. Just this idea of a team that has the capability to win and now needs to learn how to do it, needs to learn how to add all those little moments up to a victory. And I think that's what you saw today. Scoreline being what it is, but in general, you saw a team that kind of figured out when and where it needed to step up to make this happen.
Yeah, and we've seen that a couple times this year where there have been times where Indiana's really been tested in terms of they make a mistake and how do they respond to it. I mean, that's been, like you said, it's kind of been a theme of what Kevin Wilson has said over the last couple of years, where how do we respond when things don't go our way? I mean, we saw it a couple weeks ago, or I guess 3 weeks ago now, against Bowling Green when they couldn't get the ball into the end zone a couple times early on, but kept kind of pushing through it and kind of figured it out on offense. And then this week, obviously, there were opportunities where it looked like things weren't going so well, but they figured it out and they came back and they just kind of recovered from the little things that went wrong. Not converting on an early 4th down, or there was the penalty on Kenny Mullen that was kind of a little bit questionable on 3rd down. Just like little moments like that could have really sent them reeling. But they figured out ways to respond positively. That
adversity that Wilson has talked a lot about in his time here, where he feels like, in the past his team has maybe too easily folded up or let those moments get the better of it. And yeah, I mean, that Kenny Mullen pass interference call extends on 4th down what eventually turns into a touchdown drive that gives Penn State its only lead of the game, 14-13. Indiana comes right back next drive, and I don't have the exact stats
really
in front of me.
quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the next drive, I'm trying to
right down.
find the drive chart. Touchdown, Penn State. I'm now looking for it, and this is taking forever. 5 plays, 75 yards in a minute 22.
Yeah.
Capped with a 2-point conversion to make it 21-14 instead of 24, which is
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of nominal, but it's just
Seems
this,
like a bigger
it's
deal
this
at the
idea
time.
that Indiana had an emphatic answer for everything Penn State did. And there was also this feeling, and look, this is not vintage Penn State, and it's not going to be for a little while. They had a good year last year, and that was respectable because of all that they lost and all that was going on. But this team, this Penn State team, is clearly just, it's starting to get to them. They're young. You can tell they're missing playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Other than Allen Robinson. And Robinson had another great game.
Yeah.
But at some level, it was kind of like, I don't know that Indiana let this happen, but Indiana built this defensive performance around the idea that the only person that was going to beat him was Allen Robinson. And you can't target him on every single play. It's not a video game. So it got to a point where Penn State was just kind of out of answers. They couldn't run the ball. And other than Robinson, they couldn't get anybody consistently going in the passing game. And even though they went through a lot of max protect, which is what Indiana's defensive coaches said this week they would do, Indiana still got pressure. They got 1 sack, but they had Hackenberg moving around a lot. They had him throwing under duress a lot, especially in the second half. And in general, they got Penn State to this point where their offense just was kind of devoid of ideas other than let's try to get Allen Robinson open. And it's not vintage Penn State, but you look at, I mean, this was at the same time maybe the kind of performance Indiana needed. I lost my train of thought there a little bit, but I mean, this was just overall, in terms of all the things that it did well, passing to set up the run, getting through some early struggles. You felt like the game plan was executed really well.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I mean, Indiana clearly came in looking to run a lot of double screens, a lot of slip screens, but not a lot of bubble screens, which has been a big part of this offense in the past. And in the past, screens have kind of been a hit or miss thing for this team. Like sometimes they're blocked well and they work, and sometimes they're blocked poorly and they're a disaster. In this game, they ripped off a lot of yards, and I don't think we can come up with it without just looking back at the tape, a specific total. But they ripped off a lot of yards on screens and extended a lot of drives on screens and really used screens to build that rhythm and tempo that this offense talks about, being kind of in that zone or whatever. It felt like Indiana came in with a game plan, and no matter what Penn State did, Indiana never strayed from that. Played the kind of team game, team performance, got the kind of team performance that maybe we have not seen from this team, particularly against a Big Ten opponent in a really long time, and got a deserved result for it.
Yeah, and like you said, it was on both sides of the ball. I mean, they were able to, we mentioned the rushing yards, they were able to make Penn State one-dimensional, which is not really something that Indiana has been able to consistently, successfully do the past couple of years. I mean, they
especially not in conference.
Yeah, especially not against a Big Ten team, like you said. And I think they made Christian Hackenberg throw 55 passes,
school record.
Which is a Penn State record. And
for a single game.
Yeah, and
or maybe some seasons under Joe Paterno. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And where they just looked like they had Penn State right where they wanted them. I mean, even through the first 2.5, 3 quarters, where it was kind of a back and forth thing, you looked from watching the game, maybe not from looking at the numbers, but from watching the game, it looked like Indiana was doing what it wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
There were the first couple drives where
Indiana was the better team throughout.
Yeah. I mean, they deserved to win, and they, from the full package, from the full game plan and execution standpoint, they certainly appeared to be the team that deserved to win, and by 20 points even. But yeah, even early on when Penn State was moving the ball a little bit and still not finishing drives, you still felt like Indiana was making things work on the defensive side. And then even on special teams, they dominated that with there's that play early on in the fourth quarter where Steven Funderburk forces a fumble, Cody Latimer jumps on it. I mean, that was kind of
on a blocked field goal. 2 blocked field goals, really.
One of them,
they blocked one,
and
then there was a timeout to cancel the play, and then they blocked the second one too. So.
Yeah, which kind of explains why maybe Penn State was a little hesitant to try and kick field goals early on, just because the ball was slick, and maybe that blocking unit isn't great, apparently.
Well, and that's another place where you suffer for scholarship reductions, because special teams is where
There's
you need
so many players, and
maybe those secondary players. Either you get so deep on your offense and defense that you can do kind of what Indiana's done this year. I felt like it can do and like Cody
Like
Latimer is on. Cody
Yeah.
Latimer, your leading receiver, is also on your kickoff coverage team, or your second unit, your special teams unit is strong because you can call on the guys that aren't playing first team offense defense. I mean that probably is part of it.
Yeah, and it certainly seems to be catching up to Penn State, like you said. I mean, maybe last year, I think a lot of people kind of were thinking with all of these, with all these penalties or with all these reductions and NCAA things, that maybe this is the year that Indiana can beat Penn State, and obviously that didn't happen. This year, I think maybe people were a little bit more pessimistic going into Penn State just because of what happened last year and because
Of what
Penn
happened
State,
against Missouri.
and
too.
what happened against Missouri, and just with Penn State winning 8 games last year, with Penn State seeming to not skip too much of a beat after everything. I think people maybe perceived Penn State to be more of a challenge than maybe they presented here today at IU, and the challenges that they did present IU.
It's going to be interesting to see long term. I mean, we go into these. I've been writing, and obviously it won't be any longer, but I've been writing these sort of Big Ten spin pieces for the network, and I wrote last week about Minnesota, Iowa, when Iowa won 23-7, but it was a pretty comprehensive win for the scoreline. I think Minnesota, which runs the ball very well, only had 30 yards rushing in that game. And I said that there was a general consensus that we'd learn more about both of those teams from that game, and then we walked away actually with just as many questions. I think we expect to learn more from these early conference games than we do. And in particular, I think you can definitely say, what does this mean for Penn State? I mean, if Indiana wins 6 or 7 games, goes to a bowl, beats Purdue, maybe beats Illinois, and then finds that one more win somewhere else, you say, well, this wasn't a bad team. It was young, but it was good. And again, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball right now. It doesn't mean it's disaster mode. I think you did, though, learn a little bit more about Indiana, or at least what Indiana can do against, Kevin Wilson said after the game, he said, we need to win games like this, and we're a good enough team to. I think that was actually his direct quote. We need to win games like this, and we're a good enough team to do it. And I think what he meant really was, and maybe I'm reading a little too much into this, but I think at some level what he meant or what he was shooting for was Penn State is kind of on our level. And it seems a little bit incongruous just because Indiana never beaten Penn State. Mm-hmm. But where their program is, in terms of talent, but also in terms of numbers and in terms of just everything that's going on there, will the sanctions get reduced? Will they not? Who knows? Beyond what they already have, I guess. But, these are the games we got to win if we want to get where we're going. We're not, again, it's not a video game. We don't need to win at Ohio State to achieve our objectives. What we need to do first is what we did in recruiting, which is let's beat Illinois, and let's start beating Illinois and Purdue and Northwestern and Iowa to some of these recruits. Then let's develop those players and let's start taking out those teams that are directly above us in the Big Ten standings. And then if we can build to a point where we're good enough, then we can kind of be that consistent 6, 7, 8 win team. Then we'll talk about the next step. And obviously Indiana's nowhere near any of that yet, but it is kind of like you felt like Wilson felt like this was a little bit of a prove-it game or a stepping stone game, maybe a feeling like this is what we do today is going to tell us a lot about what we've got in the tank for the rest of the Big Ten season. And, if you win any Big Ten game, even at home, by 20 points, I think that's, even if Indiana beats Purdue, which, forgive me, I'm not trying to be flippant, looks abhorrent right now. It just looks bad. Even if Indiana were to put together this kind of performance against Purdue, you'd say that's, for where Indiana's coming from, that's a good performance.
Yeah. And even
and there was nothing fluky about it. It wasn't like Hackenberg threw for 5 interceptions. It wasn't like there was rain pouring down and the ball was slipping everywhere. It
not
wasn't
for most of the game.
Yeah, it wasn't a great game overall, but generally it was not a legendary game. It was not like an instant classic, but it was a well-played game on both sides of the ball in terms of not many turnovers, not a ton of mental mistakes. You didn't see a lot of penalties. And Indiana just, they just played significantly better. They played 20 points better.
Yeah, where it wasn't like they got a garbage touchdown at the end or, something like that to make a 10-point game or something look like a 20-point game.
No, I mean, they were up 25
they should've-
when they took their foot off the pedal.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
real quickly, let's talk about some individual performances. And there were, I mean, Nate Sudfeld, not great, but certainly effective. 23 of 38, 2 touchdowns he threw. Was the 1 interception. It's interesting because it's kind of one of those interceptions. It's not a horrible interception. He made the right decision. He just didn't throw the ball the way he needed to. And I think you'd much rather have that with a quarterback who's already kind of proven what he's proven than a guy who makes a terrible read and just throws the ball straight to a defender. And he did that actually in the play before, but it was unclear if that was a miscommunication between him and Shane Wynn. Anyway, Cody Latimer and Kofi Hughes combined for 13 catches, 225 yards, and a rather spectacular touchdown catch by Kofi Hughes. A sliding, he corrected the route, and Sudfeld was running when he threw the pass. I think it was a 37-yarder. Tevin Coleman, I mean, kind of a yeoman's workday for Coleman and Stephen Houston. Coleman goes 20 carries, 92 yards and a touchdown. Houston, 4 carries for 34 yards in a big kind of setting that drive at the end of the half that let Indiana take 3 points in momentum into the half.
That 18-yard run was
huge. And then some pretty good performances defensively.
And Tim Bennett, we've gotten used to seeing him
8 tackles,
really make some
all solo, 4 pass breakups. I mean, as much as Allen Robinson had a very good game. And 12 catches, 183 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But it was almost sort of like, again, it was almost this idea, yes, you had a good game, but so did we. Because you had a good game and you lost by 20 points, which means that we didn't ever let the offense spread its wings. You got your yards because you're a really good player. You got a couple touchdowns because you're a really good player and because, we aren't the 85 Bears. But your success was confined to you, and we shut the offense down around you. And I think Bennett was a part of that. Mark Murphy ends with 7 tackles. Indiana ends with 6 total tackles for loss, even though only one of those is a sack. 12 pass breakups, which is pretty impressive. Yeah. I mean, that is actually really rare, and I know that Hackenberg threw the ball 55 times, but it's rare that you get 12 actual pass breakups and not just a bunch of incomplete passes. It's rare that almost half of a player's incompletions are pass breakups, and he throws 55 passes. So, I mean, it was just and again, you don't want to get too carried away because there's a there's a decent chance, I think, when you look at Penn State now, you think that this team is maybe going to flip its record from here and go 4-8. I mean, that just where it is, a lot of young guys. Again, you saw very much today that offense had when it couldn't find Robinson, there weren't any other options. Like there weren't any other consistent options where you said, well, but you also got to worry about him and him. And the defense, I mean, there's good players. Mike Hull's back, but you didn't really walk out of this game thinking like that guy's a playmaker and that guy's a playmaker and that guy's a playmaker. So, this is probably at the end of the year going to be watered down a little bit.
Maybe, yeah, and you don't really know. It's always hard to judge based on a first Big Ten game anyway.
Yeah.
Especially one where they're fairly evenly matched, I think, with Penn State.
Probably. But at the same time, there's plenty to be encouraged about for Indiana. And there's a really intriguing 2-game slate coming up here. They've got to go to Michigan State next weekend. Spartans are outstanding on defense
and quite the opposite.
Basically the opposite on offense. So can Indiana find a way to play defense a little bit like it did today, shut down the run, and not let whoever Mark D'Antonio decides to send out a quarterback really get things going in the passing game? And then can Indiana score points on Michigan State? Because at the same time, I think if you're Indiana, you say, obviously that's a big win because then you're 4-2, you're 2-0 in the conference. You set yourself up to where you only need to win 2 of your last 3 home games against Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue to get to a bowl game. But you also, there's a confidence boost in being able to say we could score points on what's probably the best defense in the Big Ten. So, and then they got to go to Michigan the weekend after that. That's winnable. You would think Michigan State's perhaps significantly more winnable. But it's 2 interesting games because it's 2 opportunities where Indiana is kind of in a no-lose situation. If they lose, as long as they're not just totally embarrassed, then no one will care. And if they win, it's a huge win. It's not unprecedented, but like this was, but it's something that very rarely happens at Indiana. So Indiana's got an interesting opportunity ahead of it here between now and the end of the month. They'll have one more bye then, and then they'll be back home on November, I think, 2nd for homecoming against Minnesota. We're running at almost 20 minutes, but this is my last overtime. For anyone who has made it this far, thank you for sticking with us for this far. It has been a blast, and it's going to be really weird and hard to leave. But I know I'm leaving it with good people. Alex will still be here. Obviously, the magazine has massive staying power and clout just in this market over time. And who knows? Maybe I'll be popping back up on one of these at some point. I don't know what the future holds in terms of my on computer camera, whatever. I don't know really what to call this weird little thing we've built, but it's been a lot of fun. And if this is my final overtime, then it is a fond, if bittersweet, farewell. A golf clap, yes. For Alex McCarthy, he of pink shirts and ties.
Purple. It's purple.
Purple shirts and ties. I'm serious. It's been no sleep. Zach Osterman, you've been watching Inside Indiana Overtime, and God bless you if you've made it this far.